We now move to profit maximization, and this is the name of the game, okay, for anybody producing anything. First, let's define what we mean by profit. Profit is revenue minus cost. Remember, originally, way back in the original basic principles of economics, we said there are two ways money travels. Money travels in, money travels out. Okay, well, profit is the distance between those two. Okay, money in is good, money out is bad. And so maximizing that difference, money in is revenue, money out is cost. The difference between those two is profit. And yes, it can be a negative number. Okay, you can see from this. If you don't make as much revenue as it costs you to produce, then you have negative profit. Okay, you operate at a loss. All right, so, and revenue is the price we get for our product times the number of units we sell. If we get $1 for our product and we sell 10 units, then we've made $10 in revenue. Cost is total fixed cost plus total variable cost. Okay, and we've dealt with this before. Now, there are two basic methods for determining the profit maximizing level of production. Okay, the first is to measure out the money in per unit. Okay, that's revenue made per unit produced. Okay, the money in per unit versus the money out per unit, which we've talked about as marginal cost. Okay, now in a competitive industry, we'll lift this a little bit when we get to imperfect markets and monopolies and things like that. Marginal revenue, the amount you bring in per unit, is the same as the price. We'll see why it is for a monopoly that's not the case, but we'll deal with that. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Okay? And then the other way, that's the one way of looking at it. And then the other way to look at it is the revenue that's produced per worker, okay, per unit of a variable resource. All right? And we'll deal with the general rules, but essentially, we need the money in per unit to equal the money out per unit. We need the money in per worker to equal the money out per worker. First, let's look at per unit of production. Here we have the price, which is the same as the marginal revenue. This is money in per unit produced. Here we have the marginal cost. We've seen this curve before. We understand it. Okay, you could superimpose here the marginal quantity curve, which is the amount produced per worker, which would look like the inverse of this, okay? And we explained why a few slides ago, why that's the case. Marginal cost will drop as our workers specialize in their function and produce more and more, each unit producing more than the preceding unit, each worker producing more than the preceding worker, till we reach this bottom point. And what was that called? That's right, the point of capital saturation. Then marginal cost starts to rise. Okay? Any point, all these points up here, the marginal cost is greater than the marginal revenue. And so money out per unit is greater than money in per unit. And so you're operating at a loss. This area, this alpha, is where money in per unit, this marginal revenue, this price, is greater than money out per unit. And so this is all profit. The idea of profit maximization is you want to capture, that's why it's good to think of this graphically. You want to try to get yourselves to the point where you can look at this and think of it graphically, whether it's presented in a table or not. Because what we want to do is maximize this space. We want to gather all of this space. You see, once we get to this production level, okay, from that point forward, the money out per unit is greater than the money in per unit, so we're operating at a loss. So we're not going to produce here. Now, this creates problems. A lot of times, students have some difficulty with this concept, okay, because they're not thinking it through conceptually. Think it through conceptually, okay? This is a loss. We have to eat this loss, okay? because this is money out per unit greater than money in per unit. But during this entire section, the marginal cost, the money out per unit, is dropping. We need to suffer this loss in order that we can get here and make all of this massive gain. Okay? Once we've gotten here, we're done producing. Because once marginal cost starts to rise, you've reached diminishing marginal returns. This is where you have diminishing marginal returns. Once diminishing marginal returns starts, it doesn't stop. It's not going to reverse itself during the short run. Now, when we get to long run production, we expand the means of production, then this will start over. Marginal costs will drop again. But for now, in short run, and that's when we deal with profit maximization, we're dealing with short run profit maximization. Okay? So for now, once it starts to go up, we're making, and you can see this, we're making less and less profit per unit produced until eventually we make none on that last unit. After that, from that point forward in short run production, we're going to be losing money per unit, so we're not going to produce. So this will be our profit maximizing level of production. And here we have from the ongoing model of the restaurant, the profit maximizing level of production. Okay? And you see the explanation of it over here from our previous restaurant example. As we hire workers, the marginal cost drops till we get to the 7th worker. That's where it bottoms out. Then it starts to go up. What a lot of students do, the mistake they make is they say, oh, okay, well, marginal revenue, money out, okay, marginal revenue, money in per unit, has to equal marginal cost, money out per unit. So this is how many I'll hire. Because MR equals MC. It's going to happen twice. Look what that means. If you say that, you're not going to make any profit at all. All you're going to do is eat that loss. You have to keep producing through the 3rd and the 4th and the 5th and the 6th and the 7th and the 8th. Now look at our 9th laborer. At our 9th laborer, the money out per unit is the same as the money in per unit. So he's the last person we're going to hire. Okay? Profit continues to be made per unit because marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost. So even though profit per unit is diminishing, as we've just talked about, we continue to produce until marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Okay? The closest point to this is at the 9th worker. So we'll hire 9 workers, and however many you remember from the table, just look back at the table, and we'll show it again, how many they produce. Okay? And it's not very much profit. But when you think about it on an hourly basis, think about a restaurant being open from, let's say they open for lunch, let's say they open from 11 a.m., and then they close the kitchen at, say, 11 p.m. That's 12 hours. And so that's profit for those 12 hours. Here we see, now we've taken our, this is the standard, table. This is, we've abstracted from it the number of laborers we're hiring, the total quantity produced. And one exercise you might do, because you can do it kind of easily in your head, you don't need a calculator for this, is just to make sure you understand the idea of marginal quantity. The marginal production of each worker is, look at what the marginal production of each of these guys is. Like between these two, what's the marginal production of our 2nd worker? The difference between these two numbers. So the 2nd worker makes 3, 3rd worker makes 5, 4th worker makes 8, 5th worker makes 10. And what we said was, this is the worker where you're going to hit diminishing marginal returns. You see, they make 15 more than the previous worker, but then the 8th worker only makes 10. All right. So with 10 workers, they're cranking out 72 meals an hour. In one of the kitchens, the kitchens I worked at, we were pretty productive. The one that we produced probably the most on a given, like Friday night was our big night. On a given Friday night, from 6 till, say, 11 o'clock, we were open till 11 o'clock. From 6 till 11 o'clock, we'd crank out 150 meals. And the funny thing is, there were only 2 cooks. There were 2 cooks. And 2 servers and a bartender, And so 5 of us cranked out 150 meals in 5 hours. We cranked it out, man. We cooked on all cylinders. We worked like a smooth little machine. But at any rate, in this restaurant, you got 10 people working. They produce at the maximum 72. That doesn't mean we're going to hire this many people. All right. Now, we look at the profit per hour. We start off, and we understood this. We looked at this one from the marginal cost table. When we start off, marginal cost is going to be dropping. Okay. It will continue to drop till you get to this worker. Okay. Then you'll start to make your profit. All right. Because the total cost is abstracted from the total cost table, and so this is profit. All right. So again, you're not making much profit, and you see the maximum. You can see the maximization point, 9 workers. Okay. And if you look from the previous slide, what we came up with was this 9th worker is the point at which the money in per unit is equal to the money out per unit. Marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And so $9, all right, is what you're going to make per hour in profit, which isn't very much. I mean, you're making, and the question, of course, is how would you improve upon that? This is one of the problems with the restaurant industry. People always ask me, because I cooked for so long, people are always like, well, why don't you own a restaurant? Why don't you go? And people make this mistake all the time. People deceive themselves into believing that because they're a good cook, okay, or a chef, that they can own a restaurant. Owning a restaurant has nothing to do with your ability to cook. It has to do with your ability to manage. You do further with business management than you do with being able to cook. Okay, one of the people I worked for, Maria, she was a Sicilian cook. Brilliant cook, absolutely brilliant cook, taught me so much. That's why Italian has always been my favorite to cook, and what I cook best is because she taught me how to cook Sicilian food. She's a great cook. She's a terrible businesswoman. She went bankrupt within 2 years because she didn't know how to manage. Okay. And you look at this, and the restaurant industry. So the restaurant industry, I would never, ever get involved in the restaurant industry. Restaurant industry has the highest percentage of failure of any business. Okay. In the United States, 50% of all new businesses fail within their first year. With restaurants, it's 80%. Okay, and it's because of the enormous cost of production. In a restaurant, the upfront cost is enormous. You have to either lease or buy the building, then all of the kitchen equipment, okay, everything. That's an enormous fixed cost. And that's what's killing our restaurant here, okay, is the cost of production. Now, what can we do about that? How can we improve our profit? Well, one way we could try to do it is pay our workers less. What are we paying our workers? What do we say? We're paying them $9 an hour? Well, go ahead. Try to pay a cook less than $9 an hour and see who you get as a cook. Okay? You're going to get people with no experience that don't know what they're doing, and your marginal production is going to go down, and you're actually going to make less profit. Trying to save yourself some money. Another way to do it, one of the restaurants I worked at got taken over by someone who had absolutely no business. He had no idea what he was doing with managing a restaurant. What he did was he reduced the quality of ingredients. Okay, interesting. That'll reduce your marginal cost. That'll reduce your cost per meal. Okay, you drop like our ingredients here, what were they, $10 per meal? Use cheaper ingredients, okay? And you'll get by on $6 per meal, $7 per meal. Seems like the way to go. You'll make more profit. No, that doesn't necessarily follow. Because what he did, I'll tell you specifically, what he did was, we had at this bar restaurant, we had a great fish sandwich. I mean, we were noted for it, man. It was an 8-ounce to 10-ounce piece of cod, and it was beautiful. He switched that to swai fish. I don't know if you've ever heard of swai fish, but it's a bottom-feeding, dirty, filthy, nasty fish that goes for about $3 a pound. It was nasty, and nobody wanted it. And so profit went to zero. This guy took a business that had been operating at a profit, okay, of $250,000 a year profit, and within a year and a half drove it into bankruptcy because he was a moron, okay, because he was a moron. I quit on him about a year into it because the ship was sinking, and I said, I got to go find something else, man. But at any rate, and so you could do that. Now, sometimes reducing the quality of your ingredients works. Okay, I'll give you a specific example. Some years back, this is early 80s, the price of sugar had gone up, okay? And the Coca-Cola Corporation was suffering a loss as a result of it because sugar is one of the primary ingredients in Coke. So what they did was something fairly clever, and they used marketing. There's one of the USA Economics videos that we use is really good on this. They used marketing to work this out, and it was brilliant how they did it. It was nothing short of a brilliant coup. What they did was they substituted out sugar, which had gone up in price, for high fructose corn syrup, which was much lower in price. Okay, the problem is, and this is what happened to Sean at the restaurant I was working at, who was the manager that took over that didn't know what he was doing. You don't know whether or not how the customers are going to respond to that. Okay, by clever marketing, you can help to determine how they're going to respond. What Coke did was they introduced something that they called the new Coke, and they did this massive marketing campaign for the new Coke, and it was horrid. People didn't really like it that much. Okay, well then what they did was 2 years later, they shifted back and called the new drink Classic Coke. The only difference was that the Classic Coke had the high fructose corn syrup in it, okay, which reduced their cost of production literally by about 2.5 cents an ounce. Think about how much Coke produces, okay? So you can do that. Another idea that we could work with on our restaurant is we could increase, okay, the price of a meal. Can and can't. It depends on your market. Okay, what kind of a market are you in? Okay, and we talked about this with demand. This has a lot to do with what we talked about with elasticity of demand. If I'm in a highly elastic market where there's a lot of substitutes for my product, then I'm not going to get away with increasing my cost of production. If I'm running an Italian restaurant and I've got within a 5-mile radius of me 3 other Italian restaurants, I'm probably not going to get by with increasing the price of my product, with increasing the price per meal, okay, because people go somewhere else. Okay, so the less elastic my industry is, the less elastic my particular area is, okay, the more likely I'm going to be able to increase the price of my product to improve my profits. Okay, and we'll talk about that again, because that's one of the things that I like about this model, is that you don't have that much wiggle room. You've got to be extreme. And one of the things I used to blow off as a factor of production was entrepreneurial ability. But the fact of the matter is, this has to do with entrepreneurial ability. When you're looking at a profit table like this and you want to think about how to increase your profits, this is where entrepreneurial ability comes in. How clever are you? Okay, what can you figure out that will increase your profit? Are you going to cut the cost of your costs? What are you going to do? Drop the wages of your workers? Maybe not. Okay, drop the cost of your ingredients? Maybe not. Okay, how about a marketing campaign? Increase the price of our product, a marketing campaign with clever marketing. Okay, we could run some specials. That's entrepreneurial ability. We teach a class here at Robert Morris called Free Market Economics. The book is Basic Economics, which I heartily recommend, by Thomas Sowell. And he comes to a conclusion, and it's a brilliant conclusion, and we go over it over and over and over. Ultimately, the reason that all businesses fail, no matter what the business is, every business, every corporation, anything that fails is very simple, okay? Bad decision making. Bad decision making is the reason for all failure, okay? I'll give you a classic example. One of the things I owned, I got rid of it, was General Electric. General Electric, in a little better than a year, dropped better than 60% in value. Why? Bad decision making. They expanded. They did a lot of mergers and acquisitions 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and as a result had the largest debt to revenue ratio of any major corporation, of any mega cap corporation. Okay, and so people left them like rats leaving a sinking ship. I left as a rat leaving a sinking ship. Okay, so how to manipulate this profit? That's really entrepreneurial ability. Method number 2, okay? And we're looking at a very similar idea, but instead of looking at money in per unit of product versus money out per unit of product, marginal revenue, price, versus marginal cost, now we're looking at money in per unit of a variable resource against money out per unit of a variable resource. And to simplify things, let's look at laborers. Money in per laborer, how much money is each laborer making me, and how much money is each laborer costing me. All right. Now we deal with MRP, which is either marginal resource product or marginal revenue produced. I usually think of it as marginal revenue produced. The marginal quantity, how much each worker is producing, we've dealt with that before, times the price of the product. Okay, so if I come in and I'm a worker and I produce 10 units and you get $1 per unit, I've made the company $10. Question is, money out per unit of the variable resource. How much are we paying the laborer? Okay, so the MRP curve is very similar to the marginal quantity curve. It's just a marginal quantity curve multiplied by the price. So it will look exactly like a marginal quantity curve. Okay, now, and I just kind of make a footnote here that if the price of the product is greater than 1, then the marginal revenue produced will be above the marginal quantity curve. It'll multiply. If the price of the product is less than 1, the marginal revenue curve will be below the marginal quantity. Here's what we were just talking about. Okay, there's our marginal quantity curve. We simply multiply that by the price of the product, and we get the marginal revenue produced curve. And hopefully you can see where this is going, which is right over here. Here's our price of labor. Okay, before what we were dealing with the per unit analysis, we were looking at money in per unit, and then the marginal cost curve was down here, money out per unit. Now what we're looking at is exactly the opposite. Money out per unit of labor, money in per unit of labor. And the simple rule here is you got to pay for yourself. You got to bring in at least as much as you're taking away. All right? We have exactly the same situation. Because of specialization of function, each worker produces more than the preceding unit. Specialization of function. Till we hit this point, which we've been calling capital saturation. Then you hit diminishing marginal returns. Each worker makes less than the preceding unit. This whole area down here, the cost of the laborer, okay, the money out per unit of a variable resource, the money out per worker, is greater than the money in per worker. But this part we have to eat in order for us to go up here and capture this area. We almost think of it like a game of Go. You want to capture this area, okay? Once you get above that line, money out per worker, here, money in, each worker is earning more, making more than they're costing. We will continue to hire them until we get to this point. That's how we maximize this area. And I'll just tell you a little footnote. I teach part-time at Robert Morris, okay? The way that it works out is one student pays my fee. The rest of it is profit for Robert Morris that goes to buying new buildings and paving roads and paying maintenance and paying enormous administrative salaries, okay? But so I'm like down here, and the money I pull in per class is way up here, all right? And so you continue to hire till you get here. Now, the thing is, with this method and with the other method, you're going to arrive at the same point. The question is, which do you prefer? I mean, we kind of use Occam's razor here, okay? Whichever gets me the solution faster, I'll use that. I tend to use this method because it does get me to the solution faster. It's easier to calculate, okay? I can almost do it in my head most of the time, but it gets you to the same level. We see that here, okay? Wage rate per hour, $12. Okay, each worker is making $12. Okay, the marginal revenue produced, this is based on that production table. Okay, how much each worker is pulling in. All right, at 9, at the ninth worker, they're sending out $12 and they're bringing in $12. Okay. Now this is very simple because we're treating it here that our only variable resources are laborers. But as we know from our example, and is typically the case, that's not your only variable resource that you're putting into the production process. In our restaurant, we also have the ingredients of meals, the ingredients of drinks, and just kind of as another side note, since I'm doing side notes here with you guys, just as a side note, where restaurants that have a liquor license, where they make their profit is not in the food. You do not make as much profit in food. You make your profit off the liquor. Okay? A bottle of liquor, particularly the well liquor, okay, is about 11 bucks, 12 bucks for a fifth. You get 25 shots out of a fifth, and you charge 4 bucks to 4.5 bucks a shot. Okay? So for an investment of $12 for the bottle, you're going to make 100 bucks on the liquor. Okay? You're not going to get that with meals. Used to drive, one of the places I worked at, it used to drive them crazy because people just weren't drinking. Okay? And so the profit came from the kitchen. We were making them their profit, which isn't good because that's not your bigger profit margin. You want your profit coming from your liquor. Okay? But at any rate, that's just an aside. Okay, so this is what the simplified model looks like when the only resource you've got is your laborers. What would this look like? What's this going to look like? Okay, when you add the other variable resources. Well, the variable resources, we're paying workers uniformly $12. But as they produce more and more, what this is going to do is bow this curve upward based on their use of other variable resources, the ingredients. And that's what we talk about here. In the preceding image, we assumed that labor was the only variable resource. Okay, from our example, the restaurant labor is not our only variable resource. We also must include the cost of the other variable resources used by the laborer. That brings us here. Okay, now we get more. This is the amount they're bringing in per laborer. This is the amount they're taking away per laborer. This is your marginal variable cost. Okay, so now you see how it bows up a little bit more. And as the ingredients increase in cost, this would bow up still further, evaporating more of your profit. Again, this is your profit level. It doesn't really change. It doesn't change at all, in fact, our basic model. Our basic model is still what we want to do. Our game, our goal is to capture as much of this area as we possibly can. Okay. Now, the question is, here's this, okay, look at our ninth guy here. Okay. And we'll just look at it at a conceptual level. Okay. Look at our ninth guy here. Are we going to hire him or not? Okay. If we stop at hiring number 8 right here, we lose this little area, don't we? Because we would have production right here, and so we'd lose this area. But if we hire the ninth guy, yes, we capture that area, but we also have to eat this loss, additional loss. Okay? Now, here's the final summation, and this comes directly out of that cost table that we looked at before. And once again, if you look at marginal revenue produced, it's going to get you to the same point of capital saturation that marginal cost did, or that marginal quantity does. You see, the 7th worker. This is how much each worker is bringing in based on that cost table. And go ahead and print out the PowerPoint and look at the cost table so that you can take a look at that and see that that's the case. Well, it tops out at the 7th worker, pulling in 180 bucks. Mind you, that worker is costing us 12. Okay, but okay, so what you're dealing with here is you're dealing with 7 workers. All right, that's 84 bucks in labor. What were we paying them? 12 bucks an hour, right? No, we were paying them 9 bucks an hour. That's 63 bucks in labor, plus the other variable costs that they use to make all those meals. So at this point, you're making $21 per hour, okay? Which was the same point you got to with marginal cost, okay? Then you hit diminishing returns. Each worker produces less. They make less and less money until they get down here to the 9th worker. All right? And that's what you hire to. You look at the 10th worker, And this is the question we had was, if we hire the 10th worker, it's all loss, okay? Because they go down below the money they're bringing in. They're costing us $29, and they're only bringing in 24. The conclusion of Profit Max. We want to keep this as simple as we possibly can on this. In economics, we are always dealing with money in versus money out. When we deal with profit maximization, we're dealing with money in versus money out. Okay? You may not think about it, but when you deal with college education, that's what you're thinking about. Money in, that's the salary you're going to command when you're out of school. Money out, that's the investment you make in your education. Okay? Plus, after you get out of school, your cost of living. You want to maximize the money in for the money out. All right? Okay. And we had two methods: marginal revenue, money in per unit; marginal cost, money out per unit. We had marginal revenue produced, money in per unit of labor, per unit of a variable resource. Okay. Money out per unit of a variable resource. They get you to the same place in profit maximization. And that, I think, concludes everything here on profit maximization and on supply.